So good morning everyone and welcome to the second edition of our Revo Hub monthly museum podcast. Today we're joined by Hannah Smith, Senior Managing Consultant at CACI, myself, Kayley Buxton, Marketing Events Director at Revo, and Carl Halls, Director of Client Success at CREtech and one of our Revo Hub committee members. So Hannah, thank you very much for joining us today to discuss the upcoming real estate and technology trends that we're going to face this year. So we're going to kick off. So can we start by asking you to share a little bit more about yourself and your career history?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So yeah, as you just mentioned, I work at CACI in the property team. CACI do a lot of things for different sectors, but we're specifically focused on property and real estate. Essentially, we're a data and technology consultancy. And we provide insight for landlords and owners of space to answer their big challenges. So things can be stuff like what type of people use my space, which types of people don't use my space, how can my space attract more of my target consumers, which brands should I have in my shopping centres, and what functions should my space serve in the future. And that's been a particularly interesting question the last couple of years, given that how we use space has evolved so much. And I guess the reason that I'm now talking a lot more about consumers is off the back of the pandemic. Essentially, a lot of our face-to-face research had to stop all of a sudden because everywhere closed. And so what we decided to do with all this additional resource and time we had was divert our attention towards big consumer surveys to understand essentially how people were coping with the pandemic, what they were expecting to keep spending their money on, what they were going to stop spending their money on, what they were worried about. And this ended up being a bit of a lifeline for us during the pandemic because our clients were really, really eager to know what was going to happen to them, their spaces, whether people were going to come back, how to kind of survive the next couple of months. And so we really, from that, realised the value of doing thought leadership specific stuff that just look at, right, this is who the consumer is, this is what they want, this is what they're worried about right now in this time, and therefore this is how you talk to them in an effective way. And so I guess my role now is pretty much centred around that in terms of focusing on, okay, understand the consumer, benchmark what we're seeing against elsewhere, and therefore what should you be doing about it to basically make people reconnect with where you are.
Yeah, I love that.
Amazing. And so with CACI, having obviously a keen focus on real estate, technology and data, what do you see as the top trends in real estate and technology in 2024?
It's a big question. I've got a couple of things I wanted to say there. I think the first one I wanted to start with was health and well-being. I think that's going to be a big trend this year. And I know we've talked about it in the sector for a number of years. It's not like it's just emerged. But I think advancing technology really is the wind in the sail of that particular area. I think health and well-being, beauty I would include in this, are probably better than other types of retail sectors at using technology to their advantage and getting really ahead of the curve. And I also think coupled with that, we're becoming, as consumers, increasingly interested in our own data, our biometric data. How many calories did we burn today? What happens to our blood sugar if we eat certain things? How well did we sleep? All of that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot more technology in that space growing, which consumers are pretty fascinated by. And I think it plays into that personalisation piece as well that, again, we've been talking about for a couple of years. So I think that's going to be something that we're going to see a lot more of this year. I also think that in general, 2024 will be a big year for kind of advanced technologies. AI was the word of 2023, according to Collins. And we're definitely at the early stages, I would say, of a long process of us using AI. And I think it's going to be a year of trying and testing. I think we're going to use AI in lots of different ways. Some of them are going to fail miserably as use cases, and some of them will be really, really good and actually make our lives a lot easier. So I think we can see a lot of those case study examples. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on work-life routines. I think that's going to be a big one for 2024. After watching really carefully over the last 3 years, I think routines seem to be settling in a lot more. There's obviously an endless load of nuances to that. But in general, we're seeing a 3-day office week. And then the rest of the time, consumers are spending it at home if they've got the liberty to do so. And what that means is that the centre of gravity has broken up into smaller pieces. So we're more likely to socialise in city centres. That's where we're going to be doing our eating out. But then when we do our shopping, slightly moves around depending on what type of shopping it is. Functional shopping can happen somewhere closer on our high street or maybe a local retail park near us. Whereas that big, exciting shop, maybe you're not quite sure what you want, but you want to go out and get inspired, that's moving towards bigger regional mall type spaces. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting year across a whole breadth of things.
No, thank you for that. I mean, I can relate to a couple of the points that you touched on. I think I have an Apple Watch and I absolutely love it. I mean, I'm fascinated by what it tells me about my body, how I sleep, how I exercise. I think we were discussing just before the podcast about running and it being like the new hit thing in 2024. I know it's not part of real estate and technology, but I think the technology and insights that can give into how people perform in fitness and in life, I think is fascinating. And I know what you're saying about where we shop. I mean, I've always loved online shopping. I think it's great. I think what you can access is amazing in comparing prices and offers. But I mean, I don't know about anyone else in the room, but I've got scrolling fatigue. I'm like, it's just too much now and I get bored of it. I think I scroll on Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. Now I'm embarrassing telling about all my social media, Twitter, X, whatever it may be. And now it's kind of, okay, I want to go, I want to touch, I want to feel, I want to see like concepts, outfits put together, put shoes on, you know, walk around, try different things, which I think like online's kind of dying out in terms of that sense. So no, I can completely relate to all of those. Just tying into some of the points that you mentioned, I think I've experienced, and I think a lot of people are experiencing and expecting more from their communities, like than ever before. So you mentioned the rise or them becoming a bit more multifunctional and the kind of centre of gravity. So could you kind of elaborate on the driving forces behind this change and in what ways these changes are being implemented?
Yeah, definitely. We conducted some really interesting analysis really recently on this topic. Essentially, we looked at supply and demand across over 6,000 UK destinations for shopping. We looked at the amount of shops and restaurants at each of these destinations, and then we compared that against how much demand there were, how much spend there is available for those things in that area. And we did this in a post-COVID world as well. And what we found was that 52%, so over half of our destinations in the UK, have more retail than they need. And when we say destinations, we're talking about retail parks, city centres, high streets, shopping centres. Yeah, over half of them are oversubscribed in terms of how much they've got. And so there's essentially a correction that needs to be made in that sector. So we have built and opened shops and opened shops and opened shops. We've reached a point of saturation for some categories. And so there's going to need to be a kind of scaling back of that kind of provision. On the flip side, though, when we talk about communities, we can see that over half of local areas don't have enough community services that they need. So there's almost a correction that needs to happen where we're replacing kind of generic retail locations with things like doctors' surgeries, dentists, libraries, hair salons, job centres, dry cleaners, essentially the things that make communities thrive. So we need to rethink how we're shaping our local communities, make them a bit better at serving the local communities that live within them. There's obviously a whole load of variables that play into that. It depends on local demographics, it depends on the needs of the local people, affluence, age, lifestyle, all of those kinds of things. But that's a key way that we've been using our data more recently, and that's a bigger question that we're being asked more recently is, okay, right, we've got too much of this, we've not got enough of this. Can you tell us exactly what's needed to shift in terms of what it's doing for the community so that everything is there for a purpose? I pulled out Cardiff city centre, which is my hometown, just as an example. It's really underserved when it comes to beauty services and restaurants. And according to our analysis, you could add another 62 kind of cosmetic beauty brands into the city centre easily, and that would hoover up the demand that's still there. But it's got too many clothes shops. So that's just a kind of lived example of exactly how that looks in practice. And actually, if we start to correct our spaces, what we'll see is people coming back, I think, in greater volumes to especially our bigger city centres.
Yeah. Amazing. And in terms of the oversaturation of certain types of retail out there. How do you best identify and connect with the community to understand what they need to then reuse that space for the other facilities that you mentioned? So like GP services or healthcare, gyms, anything else like that?
Yeah.
How does that kind of factor in?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So I think there's two parts to answering and solving that question. The first one, we've essentially benchmarked locations that are of a similar kind across the UK. So the first step that we would take at CACI is to look at, okay, so Cardiff is demographically and affluent-wise very similar to Nottingham, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Nottingham has twice the amount of GP surgeries that Cardiff does. I mean, that I've made that up. I don't know whether that's true or not, but if that was the case, then we'd start to know potentially that either Nottingham is oversaturated or Cardiff is undersaturated. So you can kind of benchmark and normalise. But I think the second part really is to actually speak to the local community users and find out exactly what it is that they want and need, what they don't feel like they've got enough of at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's important to reach out to those people as well and make sure that they're happy.
Yeah, I think we, just tying back to a Revo initiative, we were fortunate enough to do a study tour of Earls Court recently, which is very close to where we are today, and it was quite interesting on how they developed their kind of framework or master plan going forward. I know master plan's a bit of a dirty word nowadays, but and it gets changed a lot, but it's interesting how they engage with the communities and all the different demographic groups and ages and how everyone's opinions were gathered in a slightly different way. So it's interesting that you've done like a comparison, and I think that's what a couple new developments are doing. It's kind of, okay, let's look at Canada Water, let's look at King's Cross, let's look at Brent Cross Town, and kind of what are they doing differently? Could we take on some of those, or should we go down a different avenue? What's this area missing? I think one of the things they highlighted was that there's not much leisure around Earls Court, really. So it's using kind of what their structures are and bringing that element in. I think the BBC Earth Experience is there at the moment, which, I mean, I'd never heard of Earls Court really until that kind of was put in place, and now it's all over my social media. Again, social media, apologise, but now it's all over my social media about come and see BBC Earth Experience, come and just sit and watch, come to Earls Court. So it's using those kind of meanwhile uses to drive engagement and also kind of mix up the offering that you're saying of let's take examples, but also let's look at what the current offer is and what's missing and how we can kind of compete and relate to the community. So yeah, that was my 10 cents worth.
And to add on to what you said about the Earls Court engagement with the communities, was great to see on what they want to encourage in terms of what they're developing for engaging with that space is, right, well, we need to speak to communities, and people aren't afraid to share their opinions. So they go out there and do surveys, and they're like, okay, what do you want to see in the space? Do you think we should do this? Is it worthwhile investing in that? Would you come and use the space? Versus what people say they would do versus what they actually do can be different, but still
100%.
Engaging with the communities and getting their feedback is obviously key for growing that space and building it to what it needs to be.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely would advocate for a science approach, but also, I mean, qualitative research is also a science, but it's smaller samples. But the other thing it does that's really effective is it gets community buy-in. If the community feels like you've sat down with them and listened to them, heard what it is that they feel like they're lacking on their local high streets, they're going to be a lot more helpful with you, and they're going to be much bigger advocates of what you're trying to do to improve it, because they'll feel like you are trying to improve it. So yeah, I think it's really great to talk to people. It helps definitely deepen that understanding, because maths only gets you half of the way there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And so just moving on now to one of the other points you touched on earlier is kind of the hybrid working and the 3-day working week you highlighted. So focusing on that, we obviously see CACI is bustling today with many people in the office. So do you think hybrid working is here to stay in 2024? Or what are some of the driving factors that companies are using to incentivize people to come in, where they're, say the employees, sacrificing that commuting time that they have to make? Is it worthwhile them making that journey to the office, and what's driving that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there's going to be a lot of nuance depending on what kind of industry you work in, what your office culture is like. We've been kind of tracking it since the pandemic, and we're seeing the numbers start to stabilise now in terms of Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, most popular days in the office. I don't think that would surprise anyone. I think you can you can tell by just getting on the tube at 7 a.m. How those are the busiest days. It does vary massively though by demographic. We did an interesting piece recently looking at the different generations, looking at how often they come into the office, but also what the main reason is that they come into the office. And it was fascinating. Gen Z, who have joined the workplace most recently, some of them will have joined post-pandemic, so won't be used to a 5-day working week anyway. They come in half and half. They're 2.5 days in the office, 2.5 days at home. They like the office the least of all age groups. The reasons that they come in is because they maybe have dodgy Wi-Fi at home, maybe they're in a house share, maybe they can't fit a desk in their room, and also potentially they feel like it's going to help them progress quicker at work and learn more if they go in a bit more. But generally speaking, they do not go in to socialise, and they don't massively enjoy that part. This is a big generalisation, but this is generally how the research tendencies. Yeah, and I think it's because they weren't used to that obligatory before COVID. You all had to come in. We all had to go to the office. We all had to go to the pub on a Thursday, for example. And they're not used to that culture, and so they find it a little bit alien, and they'd rather not. In some instances. On the other side of the age spectrum, we've got boomers. Now, boomers go in to the office 2.2 days on average, so less often than Gen Z. But their drivers are completely different. They love the office. They say it's a great networking opportunity. In-person meetings are a lot more productive. And they see the office as much more valuable from a socialising point of view. But are they following through with their behaviour? Not necessarily, because they're actually coming in less than the Gen Z group. So it's an interesting one. The group that likes the office the most, though, I don't know if this will surprise either of you, but it's millennials. Woo! I'm pretty sure we all fall into the millennial bucket. We love going for work drinks. We love going for lunch in a nearby restaurant. We love our Pret sandwiches, apparently. These are all the big drivers. Yeah, we come on average 2.7 days per week, so the highest of all of them.
That's so interesting. I think I don't know how much uni plays a part in this, but I mean, when I was at uni, we were kind of forced to work with people we didn't want to. You were forced to get to know each other. There wasn't really working from home. You might work in the library. There wasn't much online learning. Forced is very strong. Encouraged to get to know the people who you live with, who you work with, who you study with. And I mean, I definitely found for my younger brother who entered uni at kind of COVID time, there was none of that interaction. He didn't know anyone on his course. He knew people he lived with because they were in the same floor as him, and then all the learning was online. So that kind of group working together, the socialising, networking of people you probably wouldn't come across on a usual basis, I think it's been completely stripped from the Gen Z world. And it's sad, probably the wrong word, but I
completely agree with you. It's a shame, and I think those formative years that you have when you're around according to research, when you're around turning 17, 18, 19, those are some of the most influential years on your life in terms of who you are as a person, your view on the world. And a lot of people that age spent those in lockdowns. They did their exams remotely. Their A-levels were maybe spent basically doing work from home and lessons virtually and all that kind of stuff. And so they haven't been forced out of their comfort zone in the way that maybe their older counterparts were. And forced to be in, very kind of busy social situations, having to make friends with people that you wouldn't necessarily do if you got the choice, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I think it does encourage you to be a little bit a little bit more confident in those situations, which I think is potentially lacking a bit. That's what comes through in the research anyway. And again, I know we're drawing big generalisations. This isn't going to apply to everyone, but it just tends to be what we see.
Do you also think that the cost of living has a role to play in it? I think boomers obviously have a lot more income saved up and things cost a little bit less back in the day. They hate that we say that, but that is kind of how it works.
It's materially true.
And I think we're in the millennial era. We've accumulated income. We've got high paying jobs. We haven't spent that much over the years. But I think anyone coming up, do you think because it costs more to go out, to have a drink, to meet people, to eat out, to go to work, to join a gym, to go on holiday. Do you think rather than them spending that money on the kind of work aspect, they'd rather spend that on themselves and their friends? Do you think that has a role to play in the kind of driving back into work? And
Yeah, completely 100%. And we actually did ask a question to consumers, what would encourage you back into the office? Different people said different things, but the second most popular answer was financial incentives. So subsidised travel, subsidised lunches. I think in the current economic climate, it's understandable that people resent paying up to, what can be 40 quid for a return train if you're living a bit further away from where you live. I know that's quite a London-centric thing to say, but buses across the country have gone up, train travel, petrol prices, parking is difficult, and I think it's stuff like that is really putting off people from going back into the office. We know that costs is the biggest concern on most people's minds at the moment as well. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, anyway, moving on to positive. So repurposing of space was quite a hot topic in 2023, and I mean, I definitely think it's going to come into 2024. Repurposing of department stores was definitely in the news a lot, such as the influx of leisure destinations like the launch of Gravity Max to Liverpool 1 at the end of last year. Is this going to increase in 2024? Are you seeing this being applied already, or predicting it going to be more incorporated?
100%, and it's actually one of our headlines for. We've got a set of predictions for 2024 and what we think is going to happen, and this is one of them. It's the growth of leisure moving into department stores and creating their own kind of leisure department stores in a way. I mean, Gravity's a perfect example of how what they've managed to do is really clever, because they've taken a load of traditional leisure concepts, things like bowling, darts, go-karting. These things have been around for a while, but what they've managed to do is repackage it up in a fresh way in one place, and so you can spend a whole afternoon in that location. There's loads of different options for what you do. It appeals to every age group. Aesthetically, it really, really appeals, especially to young people. And so, we think that this is going to continue to expand. There are a lot of cities that don't have this yet, but have plans to open something of the kind. For example, I don't want to make it all about Cardiff, but the old House of Fraser has now been carved up, and there's a big billboard outside of it saying this will be a leisure food hall-y type thing. And I think we're just going to increasingly see that across the country. It's exciting, and I think it's nice that we're going to hopefully have a clearer purpose for what our city centres do, because it's been a bit muddled, I think, in the past. And I think city centres were struggling a little bit with their identity pre-COVID. COVID then happened. That made everything even worse in some situations. But now it feels like there's a really clear socialising leisure piece coming through for city centres, and if they can really kind of go after that crowd and that function, I think it'll hopefully be quite a prosperous time for them, especially if inflation starts to slow down. I say it, underline it 3 times.
I mean for Revo this year, we're trying to underline or bridge all of our activities under a theme, and our theme is very similar, is places and spaces reinvented. And it's quite nice that people are being a bit more creative with what they want to bring to these places and spaces, rather than shopping centres, I think is a new way of saying it. So I think it's really exciting, and I mean, kind of the points you've touched on, to see what people are going to come up with this year, I think will be great. And I think Gravity are leading the charge, but I don't think they're going to be the sole provider in a couple of years, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I do hope that people are brave with trying out these new concepts, because we have needed a bit of a rejig in terms of how we use spaces, and we're in such short supply of space in the UK, really. I mean, it's a very small country, but I think hopefully if we can repurpose things to what people actually want, I think we'll all benefit from it, essentially.
Oh, amazing. So the industry is witnessing a surge in the integration and evolution of technologies such as AI, as showcased by Microsoft and Vodafone's recent announcement. And at CREtech, we're seeing the use of technology across the industry, factoring in the likes of tenant experience and improving how tenants interact with properties, encouraging them to return to the office, which we mentioned earlier, and the likes of energy reduction and carbon management and that side of it. So how do CACI and the broader industry plan to harness data technology? Or what's your outlook on that? What do you think are going to be the key themes?
So the Vodafone and Microsoft partnership, I think, is going to be really significant because it's basically going to make this quite advanced new technology available to a lot more business, and it's not just going to be the big business, it's going to be the small and medium-sized businesses as well. So I think that it means that the data will all be harnessed at a much faster rate, particularly when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And I think there's a lot to be excited for with it all. We have a dedicated AI ethics director at CACI whose job it is to basically stay on top of all the new developments that are happening, and it all feels like it's changing so fast. We definitely need that to be stayed on top of. And I think it's really important to make sure that everyone that's using this new technology is using it in an ethical way as well, and I think that's just important to say. With AI in particular, I think it was going to really impact our industry in two ways. The first of which being it's going to be able to increase our efficiencies within our operation side of our businesses so much better, and the way that we segment our consumers, for example, if I use a CACI example, we'll be able to create much faster data landscapes and much more intelligent segmentations because we've got artificial intelligence to help us where humans couldn't quite get to that answer quick enough. So understandably, a lot of our particularly technical teams at CACI are really excited about this. The possibilities feel quite endless at the moment. But I think the second thing is that this technology is going to start to infiltrate the consumer experience as well. And this is really important. So how consumers interact with brands is going to be permanently altered. And I don't think we're too far away from a time where we'll be talking to chatbots, but it won't feel like we're talking to chatbots. It'll feel like we're talking to a brand ambassador with the brand's personality, and you'll get all the answers you need, and you won't be filtered through via different options like it can feel like at the moment. So I think it's just going to add to that connection to the brand and that level of personalisation that we're going to see. There's obviously examples where it's going to go wrong as well. I don't know if either of you heard about the DPD
no.
example most recently. It was where a chatbot agreed with a consumer that DPD's service wasn't great, and it started repeating back the kind of the criticism of the consumer. So there's going to be examples that kind of make people laugh on the internet and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, I think we're moving towards that side of things, and I think it's going to be a case of brands keeping up with those evolving technologies, because if you've got more of a connection with one brand than another, you're going to be spending more at the brand that you're feeling more of an affinity with.
Yeah, and it definitely doesn't take away from that human interaction anyway, because you were speaking with a chatbot in the previous iteration, whatever it is. Now it's AI, it's more human related and interactive, instead of giving you like preset questions like, oh, have I answered your question? Well, no, you haven't actually. Oh, okay, well, I can't answer anything else. Versus an AI would be able to kind of support and take you through that journey better. Yeah. And it doesn't take away from the human interaction that you would get in a store, whatever it is, and what you're doing online. Yeah,
exactly, because as you say, that interaction is already not with a human for most big companies. I mean, some companies will probably use it as leverage to say, we've got real humans on the other end of the phone, and that will still be
That's true. Yeah.
A point of friction for those two types of ways that you can talk to a brand. But I think, increasingly we'll see it, especially as it gets better and better, and you almost can't tell whether you're talking to a person or not.
And it'll reduce the wait times as well. Some occasions when you want to speak to a person on a live chat, you could be waiting 20, 30,
yeah, your
40
number
minutes,
45
and they're like, we'll text you back when we're ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas you don't really need that. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. We kind of touched on the role of technology in terms of sustainability and climate control and energy consumption management. And I think we can all say that achieving net zero is a goal for everyone. I think especially with the real estate and technology industry, where I think we're one of the biggest producers of carbon still. So just want to get your opinion on how you see, or how you've seen, or how you think that the real estate and technology sector are kind of actively working towards these targets that they set themselves. And in the current economic climate, do consumers still continue to prioritise sustainability?
Yeah. I think operationally there's been some really positive steps taken. We're seeing widespread use of environmentally focused KPIs across a lot of the big REITs and landlords. They're holding themselves to account, and I think investors are increasingly asking for evidence that landlords are doing everything they possibly can to minimise their carbon footprint. And so we are seeing a lot of progress. I think it's happened very quickly in comparison to, if you think about the last 2 years compared to the 5 years previous. I think we're seeing an exponential increase in people taking this seriously. I think we could all agree that it still needs to move faster because we've got limited time left if we're going to make a real impact. But there's been some really good progress, and it's been really nice to see almost the conversations change with our clients. When I started this job, it wasn't a discussion point in any meeting, whereas now it's always a discussion point, and everyone wants to know how they can make their carbon footprint better. So that's definitely, it feels like mindsets have completely changed. I think consumer concern is definitely growing around the topic. When we were talking to consumers during the pandemic about, do you care about the environmental footprint of what you buy, it was really skewed towards younger people, whereas more recently when we ask, it's a lot more balanced. It's not that young people are less bothered, it's that older people are more bothered because they're seeing evidence in the news of natural disasters, of climate emergencies, and I think it's really nice to see that it's not just a young person issue anymore, that it feels like consumers care increasingly. That said, we see it sitting below cost of living in terms of what people are worried about. So I think at the moment, whilst people are feeling the financial pinch so much, it won't be the priority in comparison to, can I afford to eat or pay my housing costs or my mortgages or whatever it is that people are struggling with. But fingers crossed, if the economic situation gets a bit better, it will kind of move higher up into the agenda. But I think we need more data on it, to be honest. And I think we're working on that here, and we're trying to, for example, one of the things that we're calculating at the moment, and we've made good progress with it, is how much carbon do you save by going to visit a shop versus getting something delivered to your house. And so we've pretty much quantified that, but it's stuff like that we really want people to do the research on and come up with these answers, because then we can all support the same cause basically, which is trying to reduce emissions.
It's interesting that the more data factor and kind of a proof of concept of kind of all the stuff that all these companies are doing, whether it's focused on environmental, social or governance, what is the impact? When are we going to start feeling these effects? Are we going to feel these effects? Does more need to be done? I think we've had the same goals by the United Nations for years now. Are they still relevant? Or have we managed to work towards achieving any of those? Are we like 80% nearer to achieving it, or are we 20%? I know some of them are quite generalised, such as reducing fishing, but it's kind of fascinating to see kind of what is happening outside of just real estate and technology. I don't know if anyone's watched the Earthshot Awards, but they're brilliant. It's run by Kate and William, who I love, and it's focusing on projects on each of the different elements of sustainability and recognising and funding all these amazing initiatives and people and projects that are taking place over the world, like someone making leather out of cacti. Okay, I'll cut that bit out. Making leather out of cacti, and kind of reforestation, or something of helping people in Africa have better materials to cook with or safer water. And there's all these small businesses doing such amazing things over the world, and it's great that we now have a way of recognising those and promoting those, but it's taking some of those really intuitive, amazing ideas and bringing them into our industry, and not just using general ones such as we're going to install technology into our buildings to reduce carbon or reduce energy wasted, which is great, but what's actually doing? Where are the facts and statistics on, okay, they've done this, how much they managed to save versus if the building ran normally without those systems, kind of so we can have that kind of proof of concept and really back those companies that are making those changes. Because I think at the moment it's everyone has to do it because it's seen as you have to do it. Where are people actually doing it and it's making a difference? That's where I'm kind of where I sit on the whole topic.
Yeah, totally. I heard this amazing anecdote from the guy that set up Change Please, Jamal. He came in to talk to our team before, and he used the example of plastic in the ocean and how we were all bombarded with pictures of sea life getting caught up in plastic that was ending up there from landfill. And they really, really drove that hard, that kind of stop plastic message, and it didn't really materially make a difference. And then they implemented, you need to pay 20p for your plastic bag in supermarkets now in the UK, and overnight consumer behaviour completely shifted, and I think people using plastic bags dropped by, I don't want to misquote the percentage, but it was a big percentage. And so and he used it as an example of how actually financially incentivised stuff is the most effective way of encouraging consumers to change their behaviour. And I think the same is probably true of organisations, and if investors are investing less in companies that do not have good environmental credentials, that's going to be a huge financial incentive for them to do something about it. And I think that's probably where we need to see the most activity. Otherwise, just doing the right thing and making people feel like they're doing the right thing sometimes isn't quite enough if everyone's got kind of margins.
Yeah, and you're right in that. There's a really big driving factor for real estate is the carbon credentials of that building, and its asset value is only it's going through that incremental phase of, right, well, we've got an A-star rating for our energy efficiency. Well, that's a highly sought after property to own, to lease, to be a part of. So there's a big change coming there.
Yeah.
With that, as these accreditations come out, like BREEAM and other accreditations for these sustainable buildings, which is great. And as you say, data as well, big part of that factors in. For a lot of properties just struggle to, because of the infrastructure, they can't retrofit with the right sensors to be able to understand their energy performance, which is they need to find a way to understand how much energy they are using and then be able to reduce that. And the likes of sensors can be applied to automate heating, lighting, all of those nice things that you need to be able to control. Yeah, so there's big changes coming there. Okay, awesome. And then on to the last one. So what keeps you up at night and why? And not copious amounts of caffeine. Anything else?
I struggled with this question the most, actually, because counting sheep and all that. I think one of the things, I mean, if we're going to bring it back to property and retail, I think there's so much happening at the moment. There's so much advancing technology. We've already talked about that during the session. It's growing at such an exponential rate. I sometimes worry that we're going to miss things that could really, really help us. I think if you're thrown 10 ideas of ways that we could make the sector better, you're not going to spend as much time on each of those individual things when one of them might be the golden ticket. So I sometimes worry that we're going to be missing things that are actually amazing ideas. So I think we just need to take our time a little bit more and kind of sift through everything that we're being thrown at. The second one I would say is that, I talked about beauty being a sector that's really good at jumping on top of a new technology and going with it and really being a pioneer in the space. I think the property sector probably kind of takes up the rear in terms of it being slower to adopt new technologies. And that worries me a little bit as well, because we're such an influential sector in the UK. But I think we can be a bit slower to adopt new things that are going to make our lives easier, our impact better. So I would like to see a bit of acceleration in terms of how clever we're being with our data, how clever we're being with our operations, how clever we are being with understanding and getting in front of the consumer. As soon as they change, the sector needs to change to kind of accommodate that. People are changing faster than they ever were before because of constant news cycles and just we've constantly got access to information. So I think our minds are changing so much quicker than they used to. And I just think we need to try and keep up with that as much as we possibly can. It's really hard to, but I think that's going to be a big thing that keeps us relevant.
Yeah, I agree. Now they're going to keep me up at night as well.
Add them to the list.
Add them to the list. Oh, well, thank you so much, Hannah. It's been fantastic speaking to you. Very insightful discussion. I think we can go away and I've learnt a huge amount and there's lots to reflect on and incorporate into what Revo do for the rest of the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We look forward to working with you again.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's been amazing.
Bye, everyone.